Today, we're going to explore the evolution of spiders, at least according to what a recent report says. So, welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I am your host, Doug Sharp.
And your co-host Rich Gear as well. And Doug, I'm kind of interested in this. As I said, we're going to inspect the insects, although spiders are not technically an insect.
They're
Uh,
arachnids, yeah.
they're arachnids, yes. And as I said before we got on the show, I was busy eating some sea arachnids. Man, I was having a good time. That crab was very tasty, I got to tell you.
Yeah.
Good stuff, So kind of ironic we're going to be dealing with a show about spiders, the evolution of spiders, so-called, or the so-called evolution of spiders, from a sea creature as opposed to what they've postulated in the past, land creatures. Is that correct, Doug? Am I getting it right?
I think that's what it is. Here's the article, what it says. A study published yesterday suggested spiders and their close terrestrial relatives originated from an ocean critter. It's to challenging the assumption that their common ancestor was landbound. And so what they did was they used advanced imaging techniques to check out this half billion year old fossil called uh, okay, I'll spell it Mollisonia, symmetrica, an extinct aquatic creature long believed to be the ancestor of horseshoe crabs.
I would say that's pronounced let's see, Mollisonia. I think that's probably maybe
Mollisonia, yeah,
yeah,
that would probably
Mollisonia.
be a good way to.
I wonder if that is that's the root word MOLL, is any relation to mollusk or anything, or is that totally unrelated?
Well, possibly, yes.
I just wonder with that prefix of it. But anyway, irrelevant to what we're talking about tonight. But so supposedly a half a billion year old fossil,
Uh,
which they with advanced imaging techniques, which now they're able to analyze interior information. Is that what it is, Doug?
they're looking at the skeleton of this creature,
Right.
and not or the fossil of it, and so the fossilized brain and central nervous system patterns that they saw most more closely resemble those of modern spiders, scorpions, ticks, and other arachnids than today's horseshoe crabs.
And these are land dwellers, all of them. Okay.
Okay, so the thing that's interesting about that is that they believed it was the ancestor of horseshoe crabs first, but they say, well, the brain looks more like a spider's. And so now the question is, well, what is the origin ancestor of the horseshoe crabs if it isn't this? And so they're sort of stirring up a little bit of a can of worms by doing this little study and changing their minds about the evolution of horseshoe crabs and of spiders.
But
And
Doug, this always gets back to it's like begging the question. They come up with one postulate, and that's fair. That's what science does. You come up with theorems or ideas. It's all based on an evolutionary paradigm. But as so often is the case, Doug, when they actually come up to actual real hard evidence,
mhm.
they suddenly have to change their story and do a 180 from what they did previously. But no one ever questions the basic premise of which all their theories are based upon. That's what always is so amazing. They never self-evaluation or self introspection about how dogmatically they are entrenched on this evolutionary idea that even though what they come up with contradicts what they've postulated for years, and even sometimes diametrically opposite it, they never abandon the underlying premise, which to me is the real problem here. It's the real flaw, I think, of this whole thing. Whether you deal with spiders, whether you deal with butterflies, whether you deal with any kind of thing, when they talk about evolutionary stuff, they always it's like the biologist refers to the paleontologist, the paleontologist refers to the geneticist, Geneticist refers to the geologist because none of their answers really follow what they're actually postulating. They just think the other discipline will answer the question. That's why you and I, Doug, are basically generalists. We kind of talk about a lot of different subjects. We're
Mhm.
not exhaustively educated in any one of them per se, but you have to be somewhat of a generalist because they pot shot theories at you all the time. And this is a particular one here with the spider, but it seems to me it's very similar to what we run across in virtually every discipline we run across, Doug. They come up with a conundrum or a paradox or something that's really not obviously not real, and then they just make up another story to fill in the blank, so to speak. Am I missing something here?
Yeah, that is exactly what's happening here. This is another just so story from the evolutionists. Now, this fossil that they're examining is a bottom-dwelling sea creature, or
Mhm.
and it is supposed to be coming from the Cambrian strata, which is the lowest strata that has fossils. But they talk about the Cambrian explosion.
I was going to ask about mention that. Yeah.
This is one of the creatures they find in the Cambrian explosion. But if you look at most of the creatures that they find in the Cambrian explosion, they're bottom-dwelling sea creatures. And so yeah, there are some of these that are extinct, and some of them are really goofy looking. And
Yeah, really some strange ones. Yeah.
But the question is, what do they really think that they're looking at based upon the fossilized skeletons from the past? Which do they really know what they're identifying by looking at the skeletons rather than the actual creature? There's no soft parts looking at it, so you have you can only get an artist's rendition of what that creature might have looked like. Yeah.
Although you did say they were using advanced imaging techniques to look at the brain stem and the nervous system, so that would be kind of interesting that actually could be fossilized on some of these creatures or these
Well,
particular
it'd
creatures.
have to be the cavity in which the brain.
Oh, I see. Oh,
Uh,
it's like when they do when they create like a brain of, let's say, a T-Rex based on the inside area. Is that what they're talking about?
exactly, that's what they're doing.
Okay, I see. Okay, all right.
And of course, this creature was not a very large creature. It was just a little bottom-dwelling pill bug of some sort.
How big is that probably, Doug? Do you have any idea?
Maybe about this big, you really
Bring your
don't.
hand up a little bit farther. I couldn't quite see it. Oh, so maybe about 2 inches long?
Maybe about that,
Yeah, 2 inches.
I really
Okay.
don't know. But they're saying that this 500 million year old fossil is just rewriting the spider origin story. And that's because this story is just emerging as a result of some graduate student's paper that he was
Huh.
trying to get
Was
his.
this a graduate student's paper, Doug? Was if you said it sounds like one, is
Well,
it?
it sounds like it because it's just published in Current Biology is a magazine that comes out with a lot of this research.
Okay, fair
And
enough.
and for me, it's sort of like a spoof magazine that a friend of mine showed me called the Journal of Irreproducible Results.
Irreproducible. How do you say that? Irreproducible results, huh?
Yeah,
Okay. Or non-reproducible. Okay, I gotcha. All
yeah,
right.
they were investigating things like what is deader than a doornail, and the
I've never understood that expression, Doug. I never have.
and there was one article in that spoof journal, how much wood would a woodchuck chuck?
The woodchuck couldn't chuck wood, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
and so
All right.
and they go into all this scientific analysis with all the mathematical formulas and everything to
That's fu-
determine.
oh,
So it's really a
that's funny.
poking your eyes, the curly poking the eyes type of stab at the scientific community. And it's
So, oh, is this a creationary publication or is
no,
it
it's
just
not. It's just but it is a spoof journal, and it's a
Okay.
lot of fun. But that's the whole thing that I'm looking at is that we get all these. Uh, this is the thing that I noticed when I was in college is that there's all this pomp and circumstance creating all these scientific names of things that people really didn't understand, but it gives you the air that you actually know something when you really don't. And
Oh yeah, that to me seems to be a real common technique, if you will, of the I would say anybody who wants to claim superiority of authority, if you will, whether it's scientific, political, or even religious lore, they or any other discipline, they will pontificate, make a statement, not necessarily substantiated, but they say it like they know what they're talking about, and therefore they're the authority. Consequently, you have to listen to them, and all too often when you abrogate your own responsibility to check things out. I did a little Bible study this last Saturday. One of the things about loving the truth, it's a biblical thing about love the truth. And people are deceived because they'd rather believe a lie than the truth. And for us as believers, loving the truth is very important. It sometimes makes you uncomfortable, but the idea that we want to be Berean. There's a scripture in Book of Acts, I think it's chapter 17, where it tells you that the Bereans were more noble minded than the Thessalonians, or more fair minded, more objective, if you will, because they would hear the words of the apostles and it would burn in their heart, but then they would go check the scriptures to see if those things were true. And this is what we have to do. And it's not necessarily the scripture, the biblical text, although that to me is the prime authority. It is. People always tell you, well, the Bible's not a science textbook, but that does not abrogate the fact that when it talks about things that you can check scientifically, that it's accurate, i.e., was there a worldwide flood, i.e., were we created in God's image, or at least were we created the way we were? Are there lines of demarcation between different kinds of animals? All these kinds of things, those are scientific questions, but the Bible answers them or talks about them in many ways that touches on those realities. And I think that's where we have to have a love of the truth, even though sometimes it's uncomfortable because the whole world may be going against that truth. We as creationists have run across this for many, many years, so it's not like it's anything new for us to have to try to stand up for things that whether it might because it might be a minority view. But it's interesting, Doug, the people they still believe that they are in the ascendant in their authority, and in some respects they are, because all the publications, whether it's government, scientific journals, the publication things, education, they're all evolutionary in nature, Doug.
Mhm.
So we still have that uphill battle. But by the consequence, we have to go for truth. We have to be honest, Doug, in our assessment. When something turns out to be wrong or false, look, we've had to re-examine our theories over time. But we acknowledge the faith-based reason for our premises. The evolutionist does not acknowledge that, and yet it is equally a faith-based premise. They believe in it no matter what the evidence says, and so they just make up new stories. The spider story is one of them, but
Mhm.
they do it for everything, Doug. But we are no less in religious in that sense. We don't abandon our creation belief, but we think it's not just because he said she said. We think the evidence is becoming more and more on our side, even though the secular extra biblical evidence doesn't abrogate or overturn or overwrite what the biblical text clearly says. And I think that's a fair minded approach. But the scientific community will say, well, we are basically self correcting, or we. I said, no, you are not you are self correcting in nuts and bolts areas, but not in the basic foundation of your religion, which is evolution. They never question that premise. And that's the thing that gets me when you look at the spider thing. Doug, I mean, look at something that to me is so remarkable. We talked about earlier, another insect, the transformation of the butterfly, for instance. I mean, when the monarch butterfly, it goes into a chrysalis. It dissolves into some like green jelly. And then after several months, it comes out a full formed butterfly. How does that metamorph? They make up they basically say, well, this is metamorphosis. Well, what does that mean? Why does that happen? They don't understand it any more than you and I would
Yeah,
understand it.
goes from
Outside,
an egg to
what's
a
it?
larva, like a caterpillar. The
Yeah,
caterpillar turns into a chrysalis, and then the chrysalis turns into the butterfly. Totally
yeah.
different parts of the life cycle.
But if
And
you cut that chrysalis open before the transformation is complete,
yeah,
you're gonna get nothing but a green blob of bunch of green gunk. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to get a butterfly. It's like the whole larva disintegrates or becomes nothing, and
mm,
then becomes just transformed into. It's almost like a biblical metaphor for us in our on our old. We're in our caterpillar stage right now, Doug. But when Christ returns, we'll have a new body. We will transform, metamorphose with a brand new spiritual body. We'll be like the butterfly compared to the larva. It's a fantastic metaphor. Granted, I put a little bit of religious thing in here, a little bit of biblical, a framework here, but to me it works pretty well. But to get back to the scientific community, they put words to things. They might define words, but they're not talking about why it happens this way. They cannot explain this any more any more than you can by naturalistic processes. They cannot explain how spontaneous generation can occur when everything about us says life always comes from life. It can never have non-life come into life. You have to explain that unbelievable transformation from something that's inert, non-living, into something that's living and breathing and reproducing and of course, in the case of man, has a soul, has a nephesh.
nothing works unless everything works. And in the case of the Mollisonia, whatever that is, uh,
Mollisonia, yeah.
if you have this actually creates more problems for the evolutionists because now you have to overcome a change of environment from the ocean to
Yeah.
land.
We're
Uh,
back with the problem with the whales, aren't we?
we are back in the problem of the whales. It's a little bit easier for evolution to occur if you don't have to re-engineer the whole mechanism for your breathing or whatever it is that you're going to do to get your oxygen. And so you have, according to the study, lead off, or insects may have developed wings to evade the nimble and hungry Mollisonia-like arachnids migrating onto land. In their own evolutionary response, spiders began creating sticky webs. It's a miracle.
It's a miracle. It's a true blue spectacle, a miracle in you. I mean, tell you the old song. I mean, this
So
is really
you have
ridiculous.
these little creatures crawling onto land, and now they're creating it's causing the ants to get wings on them, and then they fly away to avoid them. And so, in response, they develop spinnerets to create the webs. And I have another article here that I found from Answers in Genesis, commenting on a BBC News article that says "Tangled Web of Spider Evolution," and what was once called the world's oldest spider is now just a primitive quote unquote version of the web spinning modern spider. Now, this whole thing of primitive or advanced, it's all the only thing is in the mind of the evolutionists. Remember,
Well, yeah, because if it's older, it's got to be more primitive. And yet you got trilobites with compound eyes, way back in supposedly the Cambrian period of time, and I don't know when they supposedly died off based on evolutionary paradigms, but quite hundreds of millions of years ago, and that's about as complicated. I mean, they have compound eyes, Doug, way back in the Cambrian time, or Cambrian time, however you want to say it. But the point of it is that Darwin thought this living cell was a blob of jelly, and now we know how complicated the quote simplest part of the organism is infinitely complex, more than what they ever could have thought. And I think they get away with a lot of stuff because we only have a lot of times we only have fossil evidence. So you can't really pin them down sometimes until you try to link them with modern things where we actually can look at it. Like the real problem they had, I just read an article on the coelacanth fish, and unfortunately we have living coelacanths. For years they promoted that as a living, as a missing transitional fossil, an index fossil, if you will, the one that showed them. And now they look at it, no, they're just fish. Okay, they're unique kinds of fish and they're rare kinds of fish, but they're fish. And when you get living things to compare it with, but they go back into things that you can't ever touch them. I've noticed this, Doug, in all the disciplines in evolutionary biology, evolutionary what geology, uniform geology, whether it's genetics, whether it's paleontology, they always go to things where you can't really cosmology do the same thing. They go to things you can't really you can't really go back in time to see. And so it's kind of like they can make up whatever they want. Years ago, Doug, I may have told the story on the show before, but I remember I was in a youth group. And there was a young girl. She was probably 12, 13. She got a cute little girl, but she was an evolutionist or was prone to that. And it was at the youth group. And I was contemplating, I said, how come a lot of the best science fiction or the most interesting, the most fun science fiction is always evolutionary in nature? And she blurted out, well, that's because they can make up anything they want. And I thought, oh, that's brilliant. She, wait, wait, wait. No, I didn't mean that. That's exactly what it is. They can make up anything they want, Doug. And this spider thing is exactly a case in point, I believe, which we see in all areas of evolutionary thinking, whether it's cosmology, paleontology, geology, genetics, biology, zoology, take your pick. They always end up coming up with walls and they end up making some leap of faith to jump that wall. And the leap of faith, as you and I have talked about, it takes more faith to believe in what they're believing in than it does to believe that there's a transcendent, uncaused, first cause God who is in charge, who sets the rules, and who's made it up. Okay? He's made everything to be the way it's supposed to be. So
Well,
that's why we have sea-going creatures, Mollisonia, at the bottom of the sea in the Cambrian period, and we have modern day spiders with what they would consider the same kind of nervous system brain system because they were created to live in their environments exactly the way they were supposed to be. Now, I'm not denying, and you and I have never denied it, that there can be variation within certain fixed limits, but those limits are always fixed, and there's lines of demarcation where they do not pass. And this is what the biologist is always going to run into every single time. But the biggest one, of course, as I said earlier, the idea of something life from non-life. That's a non-starter to begin with. So they have to make up a story to bridge that gap every single time. And whether you have an open system or a closed system, we're not going to get into all that tonight. It'll never work. In fact, whichever way you go, it basically doesn't work.
well, let's talk about the Cambrian period
All
as
right,
an
let's do it.
example. I've been out to a couple of places in Nevada called Red Rock Canyon and the Valley
Oh
of,
yeah, one of
and
your favorite spots, right?
yeah, I like this place because the Cambrian rocks that they're talking about supposed to be on the bottom, the
Right.
oldest evolutionary layer that has life in it. Well, in this particular spot, they it's supposed to be on the bottom, but it's actually on top of Jurassic, Triassic, and Permian layers. And so
Oh
it's,
yeah.
here it is. You can see it's water deposited, but presumably that rock layer originated from about 60 miles away and got pushed up over on top of these other layers. And so, there it's out of order of what the evolutionists expect. And Mount Charleston in that area and Turtle Head Mountain in the Red Rock Canyon area is sort of towers over the rest of the rocks. But Mount Charleston in the background is 11,000 feet. So,
Wow.
so here's these bottom layers up at 11,000 feet, up on top of other layers that are supposed to be much younger than this layer is. And so,
And
that
all the evidence, Doug, for an uplift is not even there, is it?
well, not really.
Uplift and overthrust.
I've been to that spot where the contact line is, and
Yeah.
there's about a foot of breccia in between the two layers. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but the layers are distinct. The Jurassic, Triassic, and Permian well, the Jurassic underneath it is red, but the
Okay.
top layer, the Cambrian layer, is gray. And so that's kind of neat to look at that and study. Well, this is where they're coming from. They're defining that the fossils define what how old the rock layers are,
Right.
but the rock layers define how old the fossils are based upon and so it's a bit of a circular reasoning problem that they're using here. But this other article is talking about a Adercopus, which is this extinct proto spider, and
Oh,
so
proto spider. Again, that's an evolutionary term if I've ever heard one, but okay, go
yeah,
for it.
it says it's got the fossil, and they think that this lacking the spinnerets, and so they thought they was able to make silk, but to not be able to spin it. And so the
Okay.
question is, how can they tell that from a fossil, a spider, which probably this was crushed in its formation? And so uh,
Yeah.
you got to,
Again, that goes back to what I was saying earlier. They will go to places where you can't really test out their hypothesis very well. Well, Doug, we had a couple of minutes left to go before we
yeah.
ended up.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the question is this thing that was called the oldest known spider, as we have now shown, is in fact more primitive than a true spider. They would have been able to produce silk but not weave it, and so this that's. But the question is, well, how did they come about that? You know, I remember Dr. John Moore, my mentor in college,
Right.
talking about cover words, where they take terms that like primitive and advanced, and
Oh yeah.
these are things that
Proto.
the proto, and it's something that they use to try to prove their theory, but it's just a little catchwords that you have to look for when you're looking through the literature. Yeah, and you can probably take a little red marker and take the probablys and the maybes and the could haves and circle them with your little red marker, and it looks like your thesis will have the measles.
Yeah, yeah. I said may have, could have been. We think maybe this happened this way. I mean, yeah, there's all these kind of, and
Mhm.
that's again when you that's how you can also tell it's a sort of a just so made up kind of a story because they're grasping at, I believe, straws to try to prop up a theory that's been shot so full of holes, but because it explains everything, it really explains nothing.
Mhm.
Okay. And they would say that about ours as well. But the reality is we don't claim to be totally naturalistic in our hypothesis. We accept the fact that there is an outside transcendent creator that made this world and everything in it, and it's the way it is, and it's been judged with the hope of redemption in the future time. We know that's why death and suffering happen today and why issues happen. But they don't have this. They do not have this. Well, Doug, it's time to wrap it up, eh?
Yeah,
Any
well,
final thoughts?
there's one little thing here. Whether within the evolution or creation framework, it's risky and tentative to use fossils to determine anything about origins.
Amen.
We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.